Hello, this is Michael Kinnett with iTernal Networks, and I've been thinking a lot about the dark web and wanted to create a video here kind of explaining what the dark web is. But as I got putting my thoughts together, I thought, I think I need to make sure people understand how the internet works in general before I dig into what the dark web is and what it isn't. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the internet and how it works, and then on my next video we're going to dig into the dark web and what the dark web is, what it isn't, and the threats that are found on the dark web, and what you should be aware of in your business. When I talk to people, my clients and others, and explain the internet and how networks work, I like to compare it to the US postal system. So if you want to mail a letter to somebody or send a package, you have to know their address. You have to know where you want to send it. The address has to contain all of the necessary information for the postal system to deliver it to the correct location. So a complete address is a street number, a street name, city, state, and zip code. Sometimes there's suite numbers and other details that you need as well. And if any of those parts are missing, your mail's not going to make it there. It's going to get lost in transit. It's going to get returned to you as unable to deliver. That information, good chance of it's going to be lost. On the internet, it's very similar. So every device has an address. This address is called an IP address. You may have heard that term before. The IP address contains all the information on how to get information to that device. It could be a computer, printer, server, a phone, smartwatch, a thermostat, a website, etc. Just like a street address, if anything is missing in the address, that information is not going to make it there. It's not going to make it back. So an IP address is not easy to remember like a physical street address. For people that deal with them day in and day out, I've got all kinds of IP addresses memorized, but for general people, it's very confusing. It's a series of numbers and or letters, and will change depending on what network you're connected to. So your house, your business, it's one location. Well, could you imagine if, depending on the day and time, that address changed? How would your mail get to you? Well, it's like that on the internet, right? As you're traveling around and your devices are connecting to different networks, your IP addresses are going to change. And so the internet needs to be able to adjust and find and know where you're at any point in time to be able to access it. So when the internet was first created, they standardized on an IP address format known as IPv4. It's a series of 4 octets of numbers ranging from 1 to 255. And it allows for a total of over 4.3 billion different addresses on the internet. The last of those addresses was assigned in 2015. They are completely out of IPv4 addresses, which led them to need to implement a new standard known as IPv6. So this uses 4 times as many bits and allows for exponentially more addresses. Now, talking about bits and bytes and octets, this is all confusing. So I'm going to show you a picture here real quick so you can get a better understanding. This is an IPv4 address, 192.168.100.248. Pretty simple, pretty easy, right? So street address, street, city, state, right? Pretty easy to understand. IPv4, much longer. Many more characters in there. In fact, the difference is IPv4, there's almost 4.3 billion addresses available. IPv6, it's 2 to the 128th power, which is 340 and a whole bunch of numbers and lots of zeros, right? There's some interesting data that I can share with you about this. So for the number of IPv6 addresses, a man by the name of Steve Leipson did the math and said there's enough addresses to assign an address to every atom on the surface of the earth and still have enough left to do 100 or more Earths. So that's quite a bit, right? Now that your head's spinning a little bit with that exponential number, let's move on. Okay, so we've talked about IPv4, IPv6 addresses. Currently, the internet uses a combination of both of these different types of addresses. And at any point in time, your device may have one or both of those types of addresses. So now that you understand how those addresses work, let's talk a little bit about how you use those addresses on the internet, right? So to show this, I want to show you a little demo on my computer here.
Okay, I've talked with you a little bit about these different IP addresses or basically street addresses for devices on the internet. And let's use Google as an example. If you went to your browser and you knew the street address or the IP address for a Google search engine, you could type that in. So it'd be HTTP. The IP address is 142.250.68.78. Now, this is one of literally hundreds of different IPs that Google has around the world. So that IP address may look different than you. And you'll notice that it automatically redirected me to the google.com website that you would know and trust. That's because that IP address is assigned to google.com. Could you imagine having to remember the IP address to get to websites instead of just the name google.com? It would be very difficult. What if that server had a problem at that IP address and you needed to go to a different server at a different address and you had to memorize all those different IP addresses? It would be, unsustainable. There's no way you could do it without some sort of a directory.
So here's what the creators of the internet did to make it a lot easier for it. They implemented what's known as a domain registration system, which allows you to register specific domain names and domain extensions like .com or .net, to register them and point them to a specific device like a web server. This makes it possible for you to type in google.com in your browser and be taken to the well-known search engine page without having to actually know its IP address. So these domains and IP address registrations are all handled by ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. It maintains the database of which individuals, companies, governments, etc. have registered those domain names or those IP addresses, including their contact information for who manages each of them. So if you want to build a website for your company, several things you would need to do. 1, register a domain name with a domain name registrar. 2, set up a web server and assign an IP address to it. And then 3, in your domain name settings with your registrar, you would then point that domain to the web server's assigned IP address. This allows anyone to type in their web browser your domain name, and it takes you to your web server and loads your web page. Alternatively, they could do a Google search for your company, and Google would then tell them the website for your company. This works because Google and other search engine providers use bots to scan the internet to find what websites are available. They look at the content, the domain name, the company details, and various other components of the site to determine whether the site is accurate, trustworthy, and should be displayed in their search results. Hopefully that gives you a better understanding of how the internet works, and hopefully it wasn't too technical. If you have any questions about it, please post in the comments below. And remember, on my next video, we're going to dig into the dark web and what the dark web is. Look forward to talking to you then. Thank you.